Indeed is the #1 job site in the world, with over 250 million unique visitors every month, more than 11,500 employees around the world. But the company, in my view, has placed itself in the middle of what is really a sacred transaction between a person seeking a job and all that goes with that, a happy future, a dignified life, healthy communities, purpose and impact in the world, and an employer who wants to grow their company and their footprint in the world and all that goes with that, especially now, especially these days. Chris, how did I do with my introduction and welcome?
That was great, thank you. It's really great to be here with everyone. It's nice to see some familiar faces and some new ones as well. Yeah, I really love, we were talking about this before, I love that concept of the sacred transaction. So indeed, I joined 11 years ago as the head of product. It was a real company, it was just a lot smaller, about 130 people. We're actually now just over 12,000, so in 11 years we've grown quite a bit. But it was the mission that drew me in the first place. I had been in tech for a while, but it was the first opportunity to do something that was as deeply meaningful and personal as that. And we talk about it really that way, that in a person's life you have your family and your health, and then employment is really up there in terms of one of the most important things, whether you have a job or especially if you don't have a job. And most of the other issues that we care about when we think about some of the bigger things like healthcare and education and criminal justice reform and all those things, that employment is actually the underpinning of a lot of those, and the difference between someone having opportunity and not can really be tied to them having a job. And so we do wake up in the morning and go to bed at night thinking about helping people get jobs. And we're really fortunate that we've been able to run a business successfully, really purely focused on that mission.
I want to dig in a little bit more on all of that and your unique career path and how you also were uniquely prepared for the pandemic without even knowing that you were prepared for the pandemic. But I want to start with the heartbreaking breaking news in Ukraine. I recently attended a briefing with one of their digital ministers, and it was only then that I understood how hard they had been working to create an engineering culture, to be a beacon for domiciled other company there, to grow their workforce, and which is part of why they've been able to thrive as well as they have, because they had trained engineers. I mean, they were planning on transforming the government, all of that kind of stuff. So could you talk a little bit about your understanding of what's happening over there, what you think that your or any of our role could be in helping people who are migrating and the job seekers, and just thinking about the future of employment there?
Yeah, there's so much wrapped up in that quote. We could probably spend easily an hour just on the topic. So we start, as we do with a lot of these things, with just our employees and how they're impacted. So we don't have operations in Ukraine, but we have a number of employees who are Ukrainian, more who have families in Ukraine. We have a number of employees who are Russian, and we have engineering partners that we've been working with for 15 years in Ukraine. And so the first focus for us as a business is really what support do people need, both from an emotional perspective, but then also we've been offering, our legal team has been, helping people who need help with visas and trying to get people out of places safely. As a business, we're really focused on, there's now a few million people in the EU and coming to the US who now have work authorization. And so working with companies and organizations who are actively open to trying to hire them to find placement. When you're a refugee, you need a safe place to stay, and then you need employment. And so with so many things going on in the world, for us, we're really fortunate that employment is such an important thing, that with all of the sort of free-floating anxiety of horrible things happening in the world, we're able to focus on, well, what can we do in this case that's actually useful and helpful to people? The other big aspect of this, and we can talk about it, it will come out in the rest of the conversation, is, you wrote a piece recently about the fact that it's impossible to look at the reaction around the world to something like this and not say, where are people when there's war and conflict in other parts of the world where it's not Europe and people are not white. And there have been a lot of people who have said things that have exposed exactly how people think about these things. So we're also really aware of that, and our employees bring up these questions because we're responding, to be frank, we're responding a little more vocally and quickly than we have in some of those other cases. And so we're also trying to look at this from a perspective of how do we come up with an approach in general to help refugees find work wherever they might happen to be. And sometimes it sadly takes something happening in a majority world for people to pay attention to, but then it's a lens to look at these other issues and to see how we can show up more equitably with those issues.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about why your mission is so unique and the kinds of data that you collect, the kinds of experiences that you collect?
Yeah, so Indeed was founded in 2004 as really a search engine for jobs. The original idea was there are tens or hundreds of thousands of sites out there where people could find. Back in 2004, if you were looking for a job, you'd go to Monster Career Builder in the US or any one of these other sites. And the insight was that that's a terrible experience for job seekers because basically to find all the jobs out there, you'd have to go to dozens, if not hundreds of sites. And so we just took all the jobs, put them into one place, made it simple and fast for job seekers, and then layered on top of that a business model that was basically just bringing internet advertising to HR. So before it was classified advertising, you'd pay to post a job, and we just brought an auction-based model that really is market dynamic. So you don't have to spend any money if you're trying to hire someone where there's not competition, and then you have to spend if there is competition. And what happened in our business over the last 17 years is that we had this mission. We help people get jobs. It's on the t-shirts, it's on the business cards, it's on the walls, and everyone sort of gets that and believes that. But, and I'll just sort of tell this really brief story. When I first started at Indeed as the head of product, we would spend Friday listening to interviews with users. And the whole product team would sit down and we would just listen to what these people were talking about. And over and over and over again, they would talk about the biggest complaint was, I applied to 100 jobs and I didn't hear back from anyone. And our first response was, well, they don't really understand what we do. I mean, we're just the search engine. We bring all the jobs together, and that's the employers who are not responding. And after a period of time, it became clear that, oh, no, that actually is our job. That if our mission is to help people get jobs and not to help people click on jobs, then we have to do a lot more than just bringing all the jobs into one place. And so we've spent the last decade really going from being a search engine to being a two-sided marketplace. We have 3 million employers who live and breathe on Indeed, who are bringing their jobs, who are interacting with candidates, and our vision is to make getting a job as simple and fast as pushing a button, which sounds crazy, and we could spend a lot of time talking about that, but the purpose behind that is that the only way that we can make things easier for job seekers is if we can automate more of the employer process, take more of the things out of their hands, which makes it simpler and faster, but also when we talk about bias and barriers in hiring, there's a whole lot that we can do in theory from an education perspective, but actually the best way to reduce bias is to just remove a bunch of the steps where humans are making flawed decisions. So that's really our focus as a business and what we've been able to do that I think is different than what other people are doing. Right. In that we're really focused, and we care about the outcome. We care about how many people who come to Indeed actually get a job and how long does it take for them to get a job. And that's just very different than building an internet advertising-based site.
So that's a perfect segue into the two sides of the equation. Let's start with the pandemic. How did the pandemic change hiring, and what did you already know about the future of work that helped you prepare?
So I think that there's a handful of things that changed because it was a pandemic, and that our thoughts about health and safety in particular, should I wear a mask to protect myself or to protect other people. Like there's some new ideas that came out of it, but by and large, what I think happened in a lot of industries and certainly with us is that trends that were already underway got accelerated pretty radically. Okay. One of them for us was just around this idea of how much more can we bring onto the platform, can we automate and make simpler. We had been trying to get employers to adopt video interviewing for years and years and years, because it would just meant that if we could bring the interview onto Indeed, then we could actually get the screening and the scheduling fully automated and make it simple and fast. And most employers felt like they needed to sit across the table from someone. Right. In April of 2020, suddenly everyone needed to hire, and they said, hey, what was that you said about video interviewing? And so we threw together a team and built a platform that would have taken us a few years otherwise, mostly from an adoption perspective, and we're able to get probably 5 years of innovation done in about 6 months because of the necessity is the mother of invention, and employers were willing to try things that they were never willing to try before. And that's, for innovation to happen, you actually need to invent stuff, but then you need people to be willing to try it. So I think that's the biggest thing that it shifted, is it opened people's mind. The second area where the same thing is true is that we spent a lot of time thinking about bias and barriers in hiring and all of the areas where employers are unwilling over many, many years to relent. Need someone with a college degree for this job.
Right.
Need someone who went to Stanford or MIT or Harvard Business School for this job. Unwilling to consider someone who's formerly incarcerated. All of these things suddenly, in an incredibly tight labor market, not everyone, but a lot of employers are willing to try things and throw away some old ideas. And again, the biggest barrier to adoption of innovation is an open mind, and sometimes desperation is a really good key to unlock that.
Yeah. Any desperate people in here? Who's hiring? So top of mind for you is going to be hiring, issues around hiring? Okay. So let's segue into the Great Resignation, which is changing the complexity of the job market. It's real. I think it's real. You think it's real. What are some of the underpinnings of it, and what does it mean to be an attractive place for someone who is not just seeking a job, but seeking, a life and a purpose and impact?
So I'll say that from our seat, which I like to say we have a front seat to the global economy, most of these conversations, and I'd imagine a lot of the conversations going on here and a lot of the people that you talk to in your job are looking at a slice of the economy. That's the slice that we're in, where what does remote work and meaning and purpose mean? But 30% of the jobs in the US, and it's different in different markets around the world, but pretty much globally, are even eligible for remote work. So a huge part of this there's people who've been showing up at their place of work every single day throughout this entire thing.
That's right.
And so there's sort of two sides to the Great Resignation. We have been calling it the Great Realization, just another sort of rebranding of things. But basically, there's two sides to it. So on the 70% of the world, a lot of it was the overnight realization that there's no safety net in a whole host of industries. And so you look at people who worked in hospitality or in food service, and there was literally nothing to help them, and those jobs went away, and there was no idea that they were coming. There's a bunch of people who left who are never coming back. And even, you go around today and everyone's favorite restaurant probably has a help wanted sign in it, or there's some kind of limited service. And it's not really clear what it's gonna take in the future, but it's really clear that there's a whole host of people who left because they realized that they were not going to be taken care of, and they're just looking for a place where they feel like they can have some security and stability. Then there's the 30% of the knowledge worker world where it certainly has created a huge, I think, acceleration again. These are themes and trends. You talk to, I have two daughters who are 24 and 26. My 26-year-old daughter works in tech, and she is one of those people who, when they talk about, she's right on the cusp of millennial and Gen Z, but she cares deeply about what the company does.
Yeah.
And in the last couple of years, we've had an opportunity for people to see how do their employers show up? How do they take care of them? How do they listen to them when the chips are down and things are so much more difficult and they're dealing with trying to teach kids at home and trying to keep families and parents safe? And then how do they respond when things are going on in the world around them, starting with the wave of violence and xenophobia against Asian Americans, and then George Floyd, and then sort of everything that's unfolded after that. And so there are a host of people who are asking very different questions about, so one of the data points that we look at, so we've been doing a weekly survey with job seekers throughout the pandemic, in addition to all the data we have of job search activity on Indeed. 85% of the people we survey who are looking for work are looking for work outside of the industry that they're in right now. And 97% of them are doing so because they want to be somewhere that they feel reflects their values. And those numbers were not the same. So that trend was there, and people were, and as you know, boomers are aging out and more Gen Z and millennials are coming in, that was going to happen anyway. But it's very stark in terms of how much people are thinking about that. And then people have had in this little world, have had a taste of flexibility and freedom, and like it. And in particular, one of the things that we're seeing, women right now the numbers are still relatively small of people who when they're searching, they're saying that remote work is the most important thing to them. But women are 50% more likely than men to say that remote work is important, because they are twice as likely at least to have childcare responsibilities still. And so until that changes, there's going to be a big difference between who wants what and why. So it's hard to answer that question without looking at in the various different aspects of it. But people tend to ignore the 70% when we talk about the future of work stuff, and I think that's we spend our time with the 100%, so we have to look at all of it.
But for the 70% of people who showed up and either left or are leaving these jobs, my heart hurts for those communities, because they were already underinvested in. Then came a pandemic, and they were already going to experience job loss because automation was coming for those jobs first, right? Like, you know, in healthcare and in hospitality and in retail, like all of that kind of stuff. So they were already vulnerable, and now just some of the research that I've seen speaks to the loss of whatever wealth or safety or stability in these communities. We're talking mostly in the US, I'm sure it's happening in other parts of the world, too, that will never come back. And I'm curious what you think the role of employers could be in targeting those communities. I know that for tech, because you can work from anywhere, people are setting up shop in Atlanta, they're setting up shop in Detroit, they're setting up shop where people already have relationships and communities there. This is sort of the philosopher King's CEO question, is there a role for employers and business to get creative about thinking about the communities that were already vulnerable, now decimated, and off the front page?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, it's there's sort of two sides to it. There's sort of doing good, but it's also, even for people who don't care about that, it is good for business because there's so much opportunity. We are looking, so we actually just this year have opened up offices in Miami, Chicago, and Atlanta for exactly the reasons that we, like a lot of other people, have struggled with diversity in our workforce, because the places that we set up shop 15 years ago, no one was thinking about that at our company when we were doing it. And so there's a huge amount of opportunity for, again, all of the primary motivation for us, I guess, for that work in particular, is that it is just related to our mission. And so we see very, very clearly that, you know, we have a marketplace. And if you want to just get totally academic about it, it's like liquidity in the marketplace is what we care about. How effective are we at matching job seekers with opportunities, or for employers who are trying to hire, finding the talent that they need? The bias and barriers and systemic issues that permeate every aspect of society, but they show up very, very deeply in employment, and that's sort of the history in this country is really around work. Those problems are ones where it is so clear that, especially in a labor market like this, the things that stand in the way of people considering other people for opportunities makes for a broken market. And so our focus, like the only way that we can actually get better at our work, is by systematically deconstructing the problems that exist. And these are very, very, very old and very, very sticky problems. One of the things that's really clear to us, though, is that, so I'll just full disclosure, Indeed did not think about diversity at all when the company was founded. The founders will be the first to say that. I was hired in 2010. I was the 10th member of the executive team. I was the 10th middle-aged white guy who was married with kids. 9 of us were married with kids. The other one was unmarried. And these were not conversations that we were having 11 years ago.
Right.
And as we started to grow, without trying to really focus on diversity, we just started, reach a certain size and you're gonna hire people with a little more diverse backgrounds. And people started asking questions and suggesting opportunities for us that were ones that we had never thought about before. And a lot of them were identifying, here's people who are desperately trying to hire, here's a bunch of job seekers who are out there and they're not considering them. And so how do we shift the entire problem from being hiring based on experience and resume and moving it to skill and opportunity? And so that's where all of this work then suddenly has become a business imperative for us. It's really, really clear that we can't solve these thorny problems with a bunch of people that don't reflect the world around us. So for us, there's different reasons why people would want to invest in community, why people might care deeply about, quote, doing the right thing from a diversity perspective, but it's an absolute business imperative for us, which is why we're actually looking at and we were talking about this before, at the sort of the deepest levels of how do you actually transform a business, and it's a lot deeper than putting people through training and having a couple external speakers come in and talk about things and creating it. You have to do all of those things, but it's a lot more complex. And so investment in community is another big piece. One of the things about having a purpose-driven company is that it attracts people who care about purpose.
Right.
And so if you have a nice sounding mission and it looks good on the t-shirt and on the walls, but you don't actually act that way, you're going to bring a bunch of people in who are then going to start asking tough questions.
And they're going to take it outside.
Right.
They're going to call me.
Yeah. And so
Nobody wants that, although I do.
So if you're doing that, then you actually have to be committed to doing the work, and then the work suddenly gets, just like everything else, once you start to actually look at it, it's much deeper and much more complex than you might have thought before.
That's right. That's exactly right. I want to look around, make sure, anybody want to join in, any questions, comments, anything that's on your mind? Ask the CEO, looking around.
So I have a really clear and definitive answer. Nobody knows anything. And anyone who is out there writing blog posts about this is exactly what they're totally full of shit. So I can tell you what we're hearing from our employees. So we've been surveying people too much, but it's really helpful over the last couple of years. And we have a split. So we have 12,000 employees in 35 countries. In 35 offices in 15 countries. And the decision that we made pretty early on last year, because we wanted to communicate it in advance, was that we're going to have basically 2 categories of roles. We're going to have fully remote, which means you can come and go as you please. So you can live in the city where you have an office, you can come to the office whenever you want, or you can live anywhere in the country that you're employed. Or what we're calling flex, which is we're going to ask you to be in the office a couple days a week. And so basically, I'd left it up to the senior leadership team because they're the ones who had to be responsible for it. And essentially our inside sales team, which is pretty sizable, so we have 3,500 people, they're going to have to be coming in starting in July, 2 days a week. Everyone else has the option to be fully remote. We surveyed the folks in Austin who fall into both categories. How many days a week do you expect to come into the office? The people who have to be in 2 days a week said 2.2 on average. The people who never have to come in said 2.2. And so I thought that was really interesting. We then surveyed in 3 other cities where we only have sales offices, and this is just last week, hot off the presses, in Tokyo, Dublin, and Stamford. So very, very different cultures, very different places. And their average answer was 0.9 days, even though they have to be in 2 days. So it's a very clear message that, my interpretation of this, and it's up to the team to figure out what they want to do with it, but I think it's about listening to employees. And so the people who were telling they have to come in are saying in a protest vote that they really, really, really don't want to. And the people who were saying you can do whatever you want, they're excited to be in about half the time because we have a great in-office culture. And so I think one of the biggest things that's going on, and we talked about this at our dinner last night, is that there's a huge gap between what management wants and what employees want. And in general, if you survey people, and there's a ton, you could read whichever one you want, Management wants people in an office for productivity, and employees want to be in an office for connection.
Right.
And as long as that disconnect
That makes
exists,
sense. That makes sense, yeah.
then, but I think management is wrong about that. I mean, if you think productivity, because it basically says, I mean, you pay people a lot of money to be, creative and innovative and do a whole bunch of stuff, and then you don't trust them that they're going to do that. I mean, we have, in the last 2 years, last year, I mean, it's public now, but I mean, last year we grew 92% year over year in revenue. We hired 3,000 people. None of them have ever been into an office. We've had 12,000 people working fully remotely for 2 years, and we've had it's really hard to say that you have to be in an office for that to work. There's bigger questions around how do new people get us it. But
yeah.
we've hired 4,000 people in the last couple of years, and so the question is, do I want people to come in because I want to look over the shoulders? Because I believe it's really about this very human desire for control. It's easy for me to say because I'm not looking over 12,000 people's shoulders, but line managers feel like they're not able to control the stuff if they're not there. And right now, at least, here's the thing that I can say right now that we're seeing is that employers who are willing to understand what employees are asking for right now, they're just going to have an unbelievable competitive advantage over the ones that are not doing it. And so in a war for talent, if you're not willing to listen to your employees, you're going to try to pretend that none of this ever happened, you're going to be screwed.
So this seems like a good Philosopher King place to end.
Philosopher King.
You are naturally good at it, and you're naturally thoughtful about it, and you put yourself through processes to get prepared, like deciding only to read books by women or people of color about business and culture, to prepare yourself to open your eyes. I think that's wonderful. What advice do you have for any of us who's watching, about the pressure to decide how to speak out about issues? Because it is mandatory now, isn't it?
It certainly feels more that way. I mean, I think I'll just say how we've approached it, because this was before the pandemic. This was already going on, and that there were issues that were affecting groups within the company, and people would ask, are we going to say something? Why did you say something here, not say something there? And so for us, the approach that feels right is to actually just come up with a framework for how we're going to do it. Because the answer is there's something going on somewhere in the world every single minute of every single day that's affecting people that you could weigh in on, and it really could become a full-time job as just opposed to an important part of an already busy job. So for us, inclusion and belonging is a core value of the company. It's how we show up in the outside world and try how we run things. And so what we've said very clearly is that anything related to that and to how employees or job seekers are impacted by these things, those are things that we will stand up very clearly for. But for us, and again, it's different, so I'm a non-founder CEO. It's not my company. I'm a shepherd of something that I have immense respect for. And if I was a founder, I could really speak my mind on everything, and I have a lot of opinions on everything. I don't know that would necessarily help, because we also are, it's a delicate thing, because we want to help everyone get jobs.
30 seconds left. The future of work is?
I'll just go back to what I said, compassion, and one of the things that we talked about before, we don't have time for this, embracing uncertainty. So if you think you know everything right now, you're going to screw it up pretty badly. If you think you don't know anything, you really can't screw it up.
That's a perfect place to end. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here and for inviting me.